Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our EMAS Trust Board meeting. The meeting this morning in public is by Teams, as it has been for the last, well, how long? I can't remember. It seems such a long time. This appears to be the new normal, and this meeting will be recorded. We've got some colleagues with us, I think, from the senior leadership group, and the same advice and guidance apply. So our colleagues attending this morning, if you have any questions when we come to the part of the agenda where I say time for questions, can you just raise your hand and we'll come straight to you to take the question. We'll try and answer it this morning. If we can't, you'll get a follow-up response. Thank you very much. So Karen, have we had any apologies?
We've got apologies from Ben Holdaway, Chair, and Dave Williams is here in his place.
Thank you. Welcome, Dave. Thanks for stepping in.
No problem.
Okay. I don't think I've got any other announcements to make. I think everybody who should be here is here, and there's no other deputy stepping in. So we'll go straight on to declarations of interest. No? Okay. Minutes for the last meeting, which are coming for approval, they were circulated with the agenda. Can we take them first for accuracy? Yeah, it looks as if nobody's got the hand up to say they've noticed any issues. So can we approve them? Nod or put your yes. I've got lots of nods. Thank you very much for approving the minutes. We've got the matters arising action log, and if memory serves me right, when I read this, there are no matters arising. Let me just check. We agreed that the Freedom to Speak Up report will be deferred until July on the back of waiting for some national reports. So thank you very much for that. Okay, so it is actually now time for questions from the public. And they're relating to items on the agenda. Karen, did we have any written questions?
We've had no written questions, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions from members of the public dialed into the meeting? I can't see any hands up. Can anybody see any hands up? No? Okay, great. Thank you very much. Well, that takes us quite nicely then to the patient story, which Nicola's going to introduce, I believe. Is that right, Nicola?
That is right, and I believe that Claire, who's going to be presenting the story, has joined us now. So good morning, Claire. Yeah, this is a story. We've actually already presented this story to the Links Urgent and Emergency Care Delivery Board. And we wanted to present the story. It's a very positive story, which I think really highlights that how when we empower our staff to work collaboratively with other system partners and to work in conjunction with patients and their families and really take their wishes on board, we can deliver a level of care which certainly the patient in this case was very, very grateful for. So without further ado, I will hand over to Claire to introduce herself while I'm loading up the presentation for her, and I'm happy, Claire, to navigate your slides for you.
We can't see you, Claire. Are you there? Can you hear us?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Sorry, I'm just trying to select the PowerPoint and it doesn't seem to be coming up. If you can tell me when you can see anything, that would be helpful.
Yeah, well, we can't see Claire and we can't see the presentation.
It says it's
something's happening.
Yeah, it's whirling around on my screen, so hopefully you'll get it shortly.
Yeah. In the meantime, Claire, you're very welcome, and thank you for joining us this morning to present this great patient story. I wish I could see you so I could say hello properly, but anyway, if you can see me, hello, you're very welcome.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Oh,
I can see you now. Great.
Can
Welcome.
you see me?
Yeah, we can.
Lovely.
Oh.
Can you see the presentation as well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Technology is wonderful.
Lovely. Shall I move on to the first slide for you, Claire?
Yeah, hang on, I've just realised I've got the light behind me. There we go. Right. Yeah. So, hello everyone, I'm Claire. I'm an NQP at Lincoln and Pathways Ambassador as well. So, yeah, I'm happy to move on to the next slide.
It's very slow.
Yeah, there's always a slight delay as this slide's moving across, so let's give it a moment. When I said a slide delay, I didn't quite think this slide.
It's moved on my screen.
Yeah, it's coming our way.
I think Bill Gates' attention's elsewhere currently, isn't it?
Claire, you can start talking to the slide. Can you see it?
Yeah, I'm still on the front page.
Yeah, so am I. So are we.
Copy of it. So basically, Mark Hall last minute asked me if I had any successful stay-at-home stories, and I'd actually only just been to this one, so I forwarded it to him, and here we are after it obviously being quite successful. So I attended to Margaret, who's a 101-year-old female. She lives alone independently. She's got no cognitive impairments, and at that point, fully mobile. She'd fallen 3 days prior to our arrival, and sustained 2 hematomas to different parts of her head. She was seen at an urgent treatment centre, and for whatever reason, they decided not to scan her. In the meantime, she had a deterioration, she's been confused, and not being able to communicate to her normal capability. So daughter rang, and they got us.
Claire, you keep fading in and out, so we keep missing little bits of your speech because you're fading in and out.
Oh, okay. I'm not the best with technology. Is it clear now?
Yeah, that's much better.
Ah, right. Okay. Hang on then. Let's put that. Right. So we attended to Margaret to find her unable to complete sentences. She knew what she wanted to say, she just couldn't finish a sentence. We then sort of explored what Margaret wanted and managed to determine a level of communication. She could answer direct, sort of closed questions, and when she started to try and develop her sort of wishes, we were able to communicate. She wanted to stay at home. From this, we could then utilise our CHEM service. Just fortunate that it was in the time frame of them being available. The daughter was a little bit reluctant about staying at home, but actually it's 100 years old. It's unlikely anything's going to be done at hospital.
We're losing you again, Matt. Can the rest of you hear Claire all right?
No, I can't. Certainly, I was just going to say that, Pauline.
No,
I wonder if
it might.
Nicola could present it.
Yeah.
I'd take questions.
Yeah, that might be easier actually. Claire, I think because the sound's not very good, we'll ask Nicola to present the story, but then we'll come to you to answer the questions.
Yeah.
Is that okay? Great, thank you. Could you pick up then, Nicola, from here?
Thank you. I don't know which screen you can see, but I'm on the slide that's titled treatment plan. I'm hoping you're seeing the same one and it's caught up now.
No, we're on context, but
Nicola, I've shared my screen with the slides, and I'm on the context slide at the moment. So if you want to stop sharing, you'll be able to see what I'm doing. And then if you just tell me to move on, then I'll move on through the slides for you. Okie doke.
I think we've got that one, Nicola. So if you could go to clinical impression.
Lovely.
Yeah.
So I'm still seeing ambulance crew findings. So
that's it.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah. So the clinical impression was that there was intracranial hemorrhage as a result of the head injury that was sustained in the fall 3 days prior to our attendance, possible stroke and urinary tract infection. The crew noted offensive smelling urine. So in terms of the treatment plan, the crew did a 2-stage capacity assessment and determined that Margaret did have capacity. She was having some difficulty, as Claire said, in expressing her words, but was able to answer direct questions with head movements. Following discussion with Margaret and Susan, I think Margaret was very, very keen. She absolutely did not want to go into hospital. So the crew really wanted to do everything that they possibly could to adhere to Margaret's wishes, particularly given that they had assessed that she had capacity. Her preference was very much to remain at home, and that was really sort of following discussion that even the outcome of a scan would be unlikely to change treatment from conservative management. Obviously, the crew had a long discussion with both Margaret and Susan, her daughter, to make them really understand that there may well be a deterioration if Margaret stayed at home. However, she was adamant that she did want to stay at home so long as she was comfortable and not in pain. And both her and Susan knew that they would need to get back in touch if there was a deterioration. The crew contacted CEMS, the Community Emergency Medicine Service, and they attended, supported community care with antibiotics for the UTI and completed a respect form in line with Margaret's wishes. So the reason that we've presented this story is because there's some key points really and some shared learning. I think what was really clear in this case was that the crew took a really patient-centred, holistic approach to this call. The clinicians felt empowered and supported to make brave decisions in line with Margaret's wishes. And I think that has been a little bit of a cultural shift in the organisation. I know previously when I've spoken to clinicians, they felt that if they supported somebody to do that and anything went wrong, I don't think they necessarily felt that as an organisation we'd have supported them in that decision. I don't think there's any evidence that that is the case, but that was certainly how some clinicians felt, and that did perhaps make people quite risk averse. There was a real collaborative approach taken to patient care in this case, with different partners within the system working together to make sure that Margaret's wishes could be adhered to. And the really good thing about Claire and her colleagues is that when they're having cases like this that go really well, they're actually sharing their thoughts and feelings at station level. So sort of explaining what they've done, why they did it, how they made that possible, so that we can actually spread this out amongst all of the crews. And we've certainly seen the impact of that in Lincolnshire, with significant reductions in conveyance to ED, which is a good thing. And then it really does encourage people to use alternative clinical pathways and joined up working with other healthcare professionals. And then the last slide, which is my favourite one, Margaret was really keen that we use the photo of her on her 100th birthday. So that was prior to this call. You can see her there with her telegram from the Queen. but what she really wanted to get across is that she had a really good service from us. She said herself she couldn't have wished for better service. The crew were marvellous and made her feel comfortable, and they also made her laugh, which is important, I think. She's very grateful that the crew respected her wishes to remain at home, and that they did everything that they could to facilitate that. And both Margaret and Susan have said since that they believe that being able to stay at home really did aid her recovery, and she wouldn't have been as well had she gone in and spent a period of time in hospital. And as you can see there, the photos on the right of Margaret baking cakes is those post-date her attendance by our crew, and she was really grateful that the way that she was treated meant that she could get back to doing those things that she really enjoys doing with her family. So that concludes the story. So we unshare the screen now, and Claire, I'm sure, will be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Nicola and Claire. That is a lovely story. So straight over to questions. And if you've got a question for Claire, could you just introduce yourself before you ask the question, because she won't know any of us. So anybody got a question for Claire? Stuart.
Yeah, is my hand up? Gizmo not working?
It is, yeah.
Oh, it's
It's
right.
up, Stuart, yeah.
It's a bit temperamental. Thank you, Nicola. Thank you, Claire. I'm Stuart Dawkins. I'm one of the non-executive directors and also chair the Quality Committee, and have done for a very long time. I've got two rather unfair questions, but before I kick off with those, thank you very much for sharing the story. An unfair question for someone, either Nicola or Dave, I'm not sure which, but excellent story, everything worked right. I'd be interested in a view as to which, you've talked about the cultural changes that have happened in recent times, Nicola, but I think there's also possibly some other things like confident access to pathways. So I'd just be interested about what's different about this story to say, I don't know, 3 years ago, 5 years ago. I'm not trying to be exact. And then a similar question really for Claire. What is it in the decision-making processes? What were the things that really gave you confidence to make the decision that you made?
Nicola, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thank you. I think there are a number of things. I know that within the Lincolnshire division, Sue and Neil have introduced pathway leads. So Mark Hall, who's also mentioned on the title slide, is an emergency care practitioner who also at the moment is seconded into a role which is about promoting use of alternative pathways. So I think for individuals to hear from their peers about the benefits of alternative pathways has been really helpful. So it's not just been a corporate message, it's been very much localised. And I think it's about the way that the system is working together differently. As you know, I'm the Link exec for the Lincolnshire system, so I've been attending the urgent and emergency care delivery board for the last year and a half, and I've felt a sea change in that system in terms of the way that we're working better together. We're not working in silos anymore. We really are putting, and I think COVID has helped a lot with this, we're putting the patient at the centre and asking the question what's right for the patient rather than what's right for individual organisations, and I think are working much better together. And I do think it's about people like Claire who have these positive experiences, just talking about it and saying, you know, because it must have been a lovely feeling for Claire to go home that day after that job, knowing that she'd done exactly what that lady wanted, and then later on finding out how positive the outcome had been for Margaret. I think by people like Claire talking about those stories, that is what is changing the culture as much as the things that we're trying to do sort of corporately.
Thanks, Nicola. Dave, did you want to add anything?
I think Nicola kind of covered most things, but I think it was. I think from an operational point of view, though, I think we've. I know the teams have put a lot of work into sourcing alternative pathways, particularly over the last sort of 18 months. The system is a different place. I think I really pick up on Nicola's point there. It is a different conversation that we're having now. More doors are opening. There's more to do, and I think we can get to a different place. And I think there's been some recent audits from NHS England, which has demonstrated something which is really interesting as well, that often the talk is about inappropriate conveyance to ED. In reality, I think the words were stop chasing ambulances and start opening doors. And I think that kind of typifies how things are changing.
Thanks, Dave. It's great to hear that from both Nicola and from Dave. Claire, do you want to answer that Stuart's second question?
Yeah, is my microphone working okay?
Yeah, it is. Fine, we can hear you fine.
Yeah, I think it's really important that we understand that this is a great success story, but actually I potentially left Margaret at home to die as well. That could have been the opposite outcome. Either way, I felt supported to make the decision because it was her wishes. We were fortunate enough that it was in a time window that we had PEMS, so I had support from someone that knew what we do and how we go about it. Out of hours of getting there, I've just come off shift and left someone at home on an end of life plan actually, and out of hours from Margaret's story to now are even becoming more supportive with end of life framework. I mean, PEMS, if ever they get the funding for 24 hours for it, that would be amazing because what they bring to the table with the support will encourage more people to go down that line. And having the family on board with this is what we want, being able to tell the sort of ins and outs of this is what it could be, it could worsen, it could improve, it could stay the same, and making that an informed decision. And COVID was part of that decision making, that she could go to hospital, get an answer from the scan, told yes, good to leave, we're not going to do anything. Then catch COVID and I've died prematurely from COVID as opposed to the actual process that we went through. So I agree that COVID is absolutely rocked the way that we're managing patients at home now. And I remember watching a video about taking the patient to hospital. Once upon a time, people were saying, well, no one lost their job over taking them to hospital, whereas now we're also being held account for people in who then acquire hospital infections and die.
You're breaking up again, Claire. It's really difficult. You keep fading in and out, so we're not catching a lot of what you said, unfortunately.
I think we got a lot of the substance. I mean, it's a very very honest and clear assessment. Apart from the technology, Claire, thank you for that.
Yeah.
And I'll shut up now, but I will say the fact that the pathways are beginning to be properly accessible it's one of the two things I wanted to get sorted before I finally leave. That's the last time I make that sentence today, but it's really been such a bugbear, and if it's finally beginning to work, that's really excellent. That's got to give crews a lot more confidence. Thank you for that.
Thank you. VJ and then Leon.
Thank you, Pauline, and good morning, Claire. Nice to meet you. I'm Vijay Sharma. I'm one of the non-exec directors. And actually, you've answered a number of my questions. And the key for me is what you said a couple of minutes ago, which is that either way, you felt supported and you knew that you had the support of the organization behind you. It's really pleasing to hear that. Alongside other comments which have been made by colleagues in terms of the pathways and so on. My question is, here's a really good case study and example. How widely have we publicized this, both internally and shared it more widely externally and with even nationally, because it's not often we're able to put out something which has got brilliant outcome for the patient, for our staff, as well as that's the direction of travel in the future. I'd just like to get some sense that are we capitalizing, if capitalizing is the right word to use, but are we actually putting it out widely?
Thank you. Well, maybe Claire could answer what she's done about that, and then perhaps maybe Nicola could come in as well.
Yeah, so I'm going to try and sit right next to my microphone. So I as a Pathways ambassador, and I'm on relief, so I work with lots and lots of different colleagues. I find that through that I can support them to make decisions, what's right for the patient, holistic, best interest decision, and utilising my experience to bring people on in their own clinical judgments. I think from pushing it out from a media sort of perspective, I think that probably Nicola will probably have to be able to answer that better than me for what we have available to advertise it within EMAS.
Thank you, Nicola. That's your cue to come in.
Thank you. Yeah, so as I said, we did actually present this in terms of sort of external presentation. We've presented this at the Links Urgent and Emergency Care Delivery Board. We haven't done anything else with that nationally. Clearly, if we use this story in a wider perspective, we'd have to go back and get Margaret's consent to do so. We did have Margaret's consent to use the story, her images, etc. For this board and for the Links Urgent and Emergency Care Board. But we could certainly do that. I know Margaret is really keen to work with us on that. So perhaps that's something that myself and Mel from Comms could have a discussion about, whether we put this story out on our social media outlets, for example.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thanks very much. Leon.
Yeah, just a comment, please. Just to say to Claire, she's showing the maturity of clinician that people across other sectors could really learn from, whether that be junior doctors in hospital and some GPs. I will most certainly be sharing this story with GP leaders across the 5 counties as the maturity that EMAS are showing with the quality of their care and a real growing of our people able to make these really tough decisions and to be able to walk away from patients in an emergency crisis sometimes that are dying. That's okay. And Claire really set the agenda there for a really good outcome for this patient. It didn't end in a death on this occasion, but I think that if it had have done, it'd have been the right place, and Claire would have put all the things in place to make sure that I've been supported. And I really applaud her, and I'm very, very proud of her.
Thanks, Leon. That's great. Claire, I've just got one question for you, and it's about did you come across any resistance? So occasionally we've had similar stories, but with a very different outcome, where our colleagues have really struggled to get support from GPs and other clinicians to enable them to make the decision. And they felt disempowered to do the right thing for patients. Your experience seems a lot different to that, but did you come across any barriers or difficulties?
So this story is quite a unique one in the time frame. So I was very fortunate to tend to Margaret in a window of time that was post GP surgery hours and just before we lost the Thames capability. With similar cases, I can say that the barriers are currently with GPs because they are reluctant to, when you call them and you're recognising someone that's end of life, or you are supporting a decision and then wanting to implement end of life framework to support that they want to stay at home. I don't know why, but my experience is that GPs either think that you're writing the patient off instantly or don't want to take your account of it because the last time that they saw that patient, there was no suggestion of end of life. So my main problems have been at GP level. As I said before, out of hours are coming on board.
Great.
More supportive. So this morning they were absolutely outstanding in assisting us for putting an end of life framework in place. Leave the patient at home. This gentleman is to be on an end of life pathway, and all he wanted was for his family to be with him, which can't happen in hospital.
Thank you, Claire. Thanks very much. It's actually what I probably thought you'd reinforce what I was thinking. And so Dave, Leon's suggestion about sharing the story with GP colleagues and medical leads, I think is a really important one, because it's that sort of mindset that sometimes we need to challenge and change a little bit, and you're doing that, and that's fantastic. So well done. Are there any other questions for Claire, or can we?
No questions, Pauline, but I just wanted to say, when this was presented at the Links board, we did have a discussion around the fact that obviously until Claire and her colleague visited, Margaret didn't have a respect form in place. Yeah. Those discussions hadn't taken place with her, and that was picked up as a bit of a theme, that actually there's much more that can be done in the system, probably all of our systems actually, in terms of having those proactive discussions and getting those arrangements confirmed and in place, so that they're not having to take place during a sort of an emergency presentation. And Kieran Sharrock, the GP LMC representative on the board, is taking that forward, and he's establishing a small task and finish group as a subgroup of the board to develop those discussions with his colleagues.
That's great, actually, because that's an additional piece of learning for the whole system that's come out of this fantastic story. So that's really, really welcome news. Karen, I think you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Pauline. I mean, a lot has been said, and thanks to everybody that's been involved. But I see this as a great opportunity in terms of how we work with primary care on the developing role of the emergency care practitioner in the community. And so this, if with Margaret's permission, I think should be presented at all the urgent and emergency care boards. In terms of taking forward how we can work together on the emergency practitioners.
That's a great suggestion, and I'll leave it with our executive colleagues to consider how we might be able to do that. VJ, is yours an old hand or a new question?
It's a legacy hand. I thought I would put it down.
Thank you. And yours the same, Nicola? A legacy hand?
It's not showing us up on mine. I think you must have just a bit of a delay.
It's on now. It's okay. This technology is wonderful when it works, but such a pain when it doesn't. Okay, great. Richard.
Yeah, very quick. Claire, thank you very much for taking the time this morning to come and present to us. It's great to not only hear but see the impact that the changes are having, but also colleagues like yourself who are working so closely out there in the community with colleagues on the front line. It's great to see. I suppose the question for you, if I may, is there anything today, you've got the floor with the board members, is there anything you would like to ask of us, or anything you would like us to be aware of which could potentially improve your experience when you're doing your role, or is there anything you kind of want to say out of the presentation from this morning?
Yeah, actually, it's quite a good opportunity. Thank you. So, as I said before, I was very, very fortunate with the window of time that I went to Margaret, but I could give you many, many more stories where it's been more difficult because it's been out of hours, early hours of a Sunday morning where things aren't readily available. I suppose from a perspective of a clinician out on the road is looking forward, having the availability of more advanced assistance with primary healthcare 24/7. I know in Lincolnshire we have CHEMS who are being funded to provide, and they've already extended their hours, and I'm sure as they prove their worth they'll get funded further. I don't know what other counties have, but I don't know if this is something we could look at from an EMAS perspective of having sort of more advanced clinicians to support these decisions at out of hour times.
Thank you. Thanks, Claire. I think it comes across loud and clear around that equity of access, so that people have those access to those services regardless of time of day or night. So yeah, we absolutely take that on board, and I know Leon and colleagues are doing an awful lot of work around that system. But thank you once again for your input this morning. It's greatly appreciated, and thank you for all that you are doing.
Yes, thank you very much, Claire. Thank you for taking the time to share your story with us this morning. I mean, come straight off a call by the sounds of it. So thank you very much. You're very welcome. Thank you.
No,
Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, Claire.
It's been really nice to be able to put this story across, and I think the main thing that I want to go away from this from is, even if Margaret had died after we'd left, it was still a success story.
Yeah.
So if we'd been sharing this story from the perspective that she died at home, that still would have been the right decision.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Let me share.
Yeah, thank you. That came across loud and clear. Thank you very much.
I'm going to go to bed now because I'm back in tonight.
Yes, go to bed. Thank you.
Goodbye, Claire.
Claire.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Oh, thanks everybody. Thanks for your questions to Claire, and that was a great story, and some very valuable learning there, and some good suggestions about how we can take this story forward and try to change practice across the rest of the systems, not just Lincolnshire. So thank you for that. Okay, Richard, we'll go straight on to the Chief Exec's report. Remember, we've all read it, so it's just about an update and bringing out any key issues.
Yeah, thank you very much. On the basis of that, assuming that everyone has an opportunity to read the paper, I'm going to hand over to Dave Williams, who will give an update on, from an ops perspective, around April, and then just a couple of other items he wants to give an update on as well, please. So, and then we'll take questions after David. So, David, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Good morning, everybody. Like Richard says, I'll give you an update on April and share with you some initiatives, what we're trying to for further improvement going forward in May. I think it's safe to say that April's been a very challenging month, a really tough month. From an activity point of view, we ran 13% above the activity plan. This equates to sort of circa 234 more responses a day than the plan. And some days we saw as high as 320 responses, with some real spikes in activity. Busier than any month last year, including the winter months. I'm a little bit worrying if this for winter, if this trend continues. 8.2% of our responses were through the pandemic protocol in April, and this has dropped since February, which was around about 11%. So that's good news. From a resource point of view, I think we were reasonably robust. April, we put out 145,000 DCA hours and 23,000 FRV hours, which was above the forecast. This is less than April 2020, if you want a comparison, but that's a difficult comparison. In reality, that's when COVID first kicked off, and I think everybody, we threw everything at it. And there were some key initiatives such as buying back leave and some incentives to incentivise certain key shifts. Overtime still available, but it's slowing down a little bit into May, and I think that's reflective of probably where we are a year on from the start of COVID, and I think as things start to free up, people are trying to go out, sit outside pubs and freeze. I think that's the idea. We're still using private providers as we go forward, and we've been using our fire service colleagues in April. That ceased at the end of April, and I think I'd like to take this opportunity, Chair, if I can, just to thank our fire service colleagues for all they've done over the last quite difficult months. They've been absolutely brilliant working with our staff on our urgent tier, and I think it's been it really is a good sign of partnership working and well received.
Thanks, Dave. I think, Richard, could you and I write to the fire chiefs to thank them for their contribution? Thank you. Carry on, Dave.
Thank you. From a hospital delays point of view, in April we lost 5,300 hours, and that's an increase compared to the same period last year of 1,600 hours. And I think just to put that mark out, it is difficult to compare because life was slightly different then, and I think people were a little bit more nervous about going into hospital, about turning up at hospital, and I think there was other provisions in place. So, but that's where we're at. I think Ben wanted me to mention that him and Leon were members of a new ambulance flow group set up by NHS England. And I think they had the first meeting last week, and I think going forward that may pay some dividends around actually looking at what really is a flow issue across the system, isn't it, more than anything when we finish up queuing at hospitals. Non-conveyance, I think, held up really well. I think we're still in a positive position, and I think it's been further supported by introduction of a specialist practitioner. I think I've seen some really good results from those guys. We're on circa 40% non-conveyance, and out of that, the split is here in treat at 9.36 and see and treat at 30.88. So I think a reasonably healthy position, and we're working hard to improve that, as colleagues have just heard from Claire. Conveyed to hospital, sort of circa 60%. Out of that, 54% went to ED. The others went to non-ED, which I think is an improvement on how we actually not always queuing at ED. We're actually trying really hard to take them to non-ED sort of dispositions, which I think is healthy. The performance for April finished around circa category 1, 724 mean, 90th percentile 1314. Category 2, 2612. 90th 5341, category 3 3 hours 15, category 4 4 hours 12. So some challenges there, but some of the divisions did hit the life-threatening sort of calls, which I think is really important. Notts hit C1 mean at 90th, Northants C1 90th, and Leicestershire hit both the C1 mean and the 90th, which I think, given all the circumstances just described, I think was a great effort. Going forward with a series of improvement actions, and I think it builds upon the releasing time to care initiative that we launched last year. This is almost the phase 2 elements of this. Some of the things we're looking at is changing the way we respond blue lights for C3 cases, a focus on the backup for FRVs, really trying to get there quicker. Automation of clear at hospital. So after 15 minutes, we'll be calling you clear, unless you can give us a good reason why we wouldn't do that. Obviously looking at and thinking about things like the C1 case RTCs, where people do need time to recover and clean the vehicles, etc. But working with us to let us know if there's a problem, we can work with you on that. We're going to trial that to start with in North and North East links in May. There's some issues around the top end around sort of coming clear at hospital that we want to really push. An auto meal break trial, so that you'll get booked on a meal break sort of 5 minutes after you return back to station. We've had a few problems with our MIS modules, perhaps as always, but we're working with that, trying to improve it. And a refreshed end of shift process.
Great, Dave, just what's an MIS module?
It's the system that we operate within our control system. It's the underpinning system that causes a few problems now and again, Pauline.
Okay, to communicate with crews?
Yeah, it's a bit broader than that. It's the way we actually operate our system. So, for instance, being able to book on station, there's an MIS module that supports that. It's a piece of software.
Okay, thank you.
Another initiative we've got at the moment is our EMAS operational roadmap, which mirrors the national COVID roadmap. Each division is actually planned over the next right up to June and beyond, to be honest, looking at the key areas where we're likely to be at risk. I think this is really important. That forms a daily conversation with our operational managers, and equally a weekly conversation with our strategic commanders, so that we're working on a no surprise sort of basis there. And there's various things there, like the pubs opening, for instance, and equally 1 or 2 sort of religious holidays and sporting events. As life starts to come back into more of a normal perspective, we want to make sure that we're ahead of the game on that one and planning our resources accordingly. That seems to be going quite well. And lastly, a reshaping operations update. On the 21st of April, we launched our reshaping operations, and this is really geared towards improving our leadership and making sure it's fit for purpose and can actually meet the future challenges of an ever-changing system. It really is about empowering our local teams to deliver, but linked into a central basis. And I think it's about strengthening our clinical front-end leadership recognising that it's a key part of what we do. Working with Leon's team, I think it's started to take a really good shape for us. And lastly, it's about improving our command and control element of that, the scene and situation stuff that we do on a 24-hour basis. So there's a lot in this, but we launched it on the 21st Ben did a series of briefings right up to 8 o'clock at night with all colleagues. I think we saw something about 181 people in the day, which was really good, including our staff side colleagues. From then, the divisions are undertaking or have undertook a series of divisional briefings and then a series of one-to-ones with staff, so we can actually understand where they want to be in this new leadership structure. We're currently working on finalising the assessment centre element of that, and also working on the development needs. So with the new management teams going in, we want to make sure that they're fully supported with their development needs, aligned with our development needs, but actually honing that in around the one-to-ones and what people are telling us. I think the initial feedback seems really positive, and any smaller issues will be taken through the one-to-one system. Ben and myself are meeting with staff side on a weekly basis to pick up on anything that we need to, but the feedback is really positive at this time. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, David.
Yes, thanks, David. Thank you. And I think what's really important as well is you've just given some real context around everything else that's still going on, and there's an awful lot still happening across the organisation. So perhaps you really comment around the fire service. Absolutely, huge admiration for what support they've provided to us over many months now, and we know we're in the planning stages of a recognition event later on this year, which we will do that, and that also goes hand in hand with the support we've had from many community responders over such an extended period of time. Our bank colleagues who've put an awful lot of amount of hours into supporting the front line as well. So really greatly appreciated. If I can, Paul, I'll pause and take any questions at this stage. And I think Kerry has a slight update to provide as well.
Okay. Shall we do Kerry's update first and then go to questions? Kerry?
Apologies, I put my hand up for something else. So I think the only update to provide, which is set out in the Chief Executive's report, is around the workforce plan for the year 2021, and the information in the report just sets out the delivery of the workforce plan to provide assurance. And then as part of the Chief Executive's report within the IBR, there is an incorrect metric on sickness absence, which is W2, and it shows the year to date at 6.32, and that should be 5.72 for accuracy. So happy to either put my question across now, Chair, or come back in later when you're ready.
And I'm very happy for you to put your question to us, Kerry.
Thank you. David, it was just a point on the calling clear efficiency intervention that's been put in place. And I suppose the thing I'm thinking about is, how will we know that, with that being an automatic intervention, how are we going to ensure that we don't miss the opportunity to understand if staff have any immediate well-being needs addressed? And I just want to make sure that we've thought about how we're going to manage that, to ensure that if a staff member does need support after a particular incident, that the calling clear methodology doesn't miss that.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, Kerry, because I think that's at the heart of what we're trying to do. In a way, try and create more time for people who need it most, and just accepting that perhaps 80-90% of the time colleagues perhaps don't need as much time as they're taking. If you can imagine that the pre-handover, the clinical handover used to be more excessive than the post-handover. Actually, that's improved dramatically over the last few months. What we're trying to do now is improve our post-handover. Give more time to colleagues who need it most, like I said, but equally it's not just almost a blind automated system. Our control staff will be working really hard to keep looking at and preempt when a crew perhaps needs some more time. They know what calls are actually giving out, but it's not just almost a blind sort of sending a 15 minutes, get ready guys. It's actually work with us.
Dave, Could I comment there? Ben did reassure me, Kerry, it's a really good question. Some of the codes for certain calls won't automatically clear. So they have worked through that, and there are ones like cardiac arrest and paediatric cases where they won't automatically clear. So it's just for the majority of our bulk work, as I would call it.
I think that's a good point, Leon. Yeah, there's a science to it and there's a human element to this, and I think that's what I was going to go on to say. I think it's really important that we match the two.
Thank you.
Just on that same theme, before I put it to wider questions, you mentioned, Dave, that it's going to be piloted in North East Links. How long? North and North East Link. How long is the pilot for?
I think initially we talked about a week to 2 weeks, depends how that goes. We've been working with staff side to have that conversation. It's probably going to be a difficult conversation, but for the right reasons. But we're working up there because obviously there's some issues that there we need to resolve.
Yeah. Okay. And if the pilot's unsuccessful?
Well, we'll just revisit where it went wrong. I think the principle, we feel the principle is right. And I think getting the right balance, we're determined to get it right and work really hard to get this right. But we're also determined to put more hours into the plan so we can get to patients quicker. And this is a key element that we need to get better at. Okay,
thank you very much. I'll throw it open now to wider questions on the Chief Executive's report. And Karen, you've got your hand up, and then I'll come to Perminder.
Okay, thanks, and thanks, Dave. And I know it's really tough out there, but I know you focused in on all the efficiency stuff that you're doing. But just to say that is important in terms of going forward, because when we're looking at the cost efficiency programme and the way that we do move forward, these are key areas that we need to focus in on because they're going to make the greatest impact. So that was a statement really, but also I wanted to compliment operational management and teams, because the blend of keeping the strategic direction going when you've got 234 more patients a day and a 13% increase in activity, and yet you're still strategically planning on the efficiency, I think is testament to your commitment to the services. So no questions as such, Dave, but really just to say well done on that front.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very welcome feedback. Thank you, Karen. Perminder.
Thank you, Pauline. A couple of questions. One more possibly that David could respond to. Previously, we did talk about whereby we were taking patients, local patients, to the most immediate hospital, and then finding that the hospital could not attend to those patients, and then having to take them elsewhere. Are we having those incidents still happening?
Yeah, occasionally when we have some of these spikes in activity, we do see that. I think from my point of view, it's not as bad as it used to be, which is almost like I always look for the positive. My glass is always half full on this one. It's not as bad as it used to be. And I think I'll be honest with you, I think we have better working relationships developed over the last couple of years, particularly through COVID. And equally, I've really worked hard with the teams to push a lot of the decision making down to the divisional level and not always come through our control centre, so that often they will pick up early issues and have the conversations that only a local divisional team can have with their A&E unit. And I think that seems to have worked quite well.
Do we have any kind of reporting mechanisms or kind of any data collection on these type of incidents?
Yeah, we can observe it live. We've got the logs that capture it, and equally we run the reports around delays at hospital on a regular basis, and that's fed in through the A&E boards. It's fed in through other conversations, and as part of what we're trying to do, we have regular conversations with the system to say actually it's not good enough sometimes. Yeah.
Okay. And then my next question was to you, Richard. In terms of reading through the report, yes, and got some positive directions and some areas of improvement. I just wanted to get a sense of what the morale now, we're kind of coming out of this dark cloud and there is optimism, but how do we as an organisation feel that the morale and
It's really good question. I think it's mixed, isn't it? In the sense that society is moving and things are changing and emerging, and there's a sense of a slight return to normalities on the horizon. I think the reality is and what David has already presented this morning is demonstrating that organisationally we don't have the luxury of having any sort of, any downtime, because our demand is increasing as society is changing and things are opening up once again. Our demand is becoming more, and on the back of that, we still have a very tired workforce. And as with many colleagues, people haven't really had the breaks that they would normally have. People have not been able to go on holiday and so on and so forth. So it'd be really wrong of me to say that morale is in a really good place. I think what's very evident is people are being provided lots of support. There are new ways of what we've adapted as an organisation and how we engage and how we support our frontline colleagues. But what we also have to do now is, as David has alluded to, around the management structures, and this is wider than just the operations management structure, but the leadership across the organisation. We have to keep adapting to what we're experiencing and making sure that we can support our staff in different ways. And there will be pockets of the organisation where staff will talk about positive morale. Equally, there will be some areas where people will feel some real challenges, some negativity, and we've just got to make sure as an organisation we can react to that. What does give me a degree of reassurance is it's reflecting in the wider healthcare system. So when I talk to my chief exec colleagues, they talk about similar experiences in their own organisations. That's in ambulance services and other bits of the NHS. So we're not unique, but that we certainly can't rest on our laurels. And what we have to do now is we have to do more to make sure that we can support our front line. So it's a very long-winded way of saying we still are in a challenged place. And I think we don't know what we know just yet. And I think challenges will manifest themselves in different ways over the period ahead. But what we do know is that we're able to react and support colleagues as required.
Thank you. Just on that similar theme, I think we need to be live to the fact that the work Dave's been talking about on the release and time to care. Thank you, release time to care project, which is really all about how we make our service more efficient. That will create some disharmony for some of our workforce. I think we need to anticipate that, because we're potentially saying to them, you need to work faster, turn patients around more quickly, not stop talking as much as you do at post handover to get patients and clear and call clear. So, and we know that for some people they'll find that challenging, and so on top of an already tired workforce, being challenged about becoming more efficient is quite a dilemma, but it's absolutely the right thing to do, and there'll never be a good time to do it. So I reiterate Karen's point. It's fantastic that we're still pushing forward with this agenda, because that is what will make the difference and help us tackle this issue to do with activity outstretching resources potentially.
Yeah, thanks, Paul.
Any other questions for Richard on the Chief Exec's report? Stuart and Dave. And VJ. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. A question and a request, really. The question is it still the case that 111 has been a big driver of activity, and in which case, what's happening about that? And the request really picks up on partly on Karen's comments and the stuff about the workforce plan. It would be good to see the workforce plan at the board reasonably soon, and ideally things like skill mix and management span of control and stuff for the new plans, because I certainly haven't got clear in my own mind what that looks like, and maybe with some benchmarks against other ambulance services. We seem to be running a very good ship at present, but once of a day they were quite important things for us to check out, and I don't think we've seen them at the board for quite some time. But anyway, 111 was a substantive question.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. So the 111 absolutely is still a massive driver of our demand. There's no surprise that 111 themselves are under significant pressure. Now, in part, that is as a result of the 111 First initiative, which went live prior to Christmas. So that is now it's new and emerging types of demand as well, because we don't have long enough of this system operating under I'm going to say a post-COVID era, so we don't quite know what those activities will present themselves. But what we can give assurance is that as an organisation, we are heavily involved with dialogue with 111, and that will be kind of operationally, tactically on the day, and also strategically with our partners in 111 as our commissioners as well. So it's something which we are heavily engaged with at a system level and will continue to do so. Stuart, your second point around workforce plan, skill mix and the management structure, absolutely point noted, and we'll make sure that's reflected.
I think that the timing for that will be, Stuart, when we look at the H2 plan.
Yeah.
So I think there's an item further on in the agenda where we're asked to look at how we agree that plan for the second part of the year. I think that's when we need to see the workforce plan.
Yeah, absolutely.
To support that, it'll come out of that. And just on that point about 111 and the activity, Dave, do we know what's driving this 13% increase in activity? Because it's not sustainable.
No, and it really isn't sustainable. But I think partly they're busy because we're busier and everybody's busier, so we're getting more through. But that doesn't account for all of the increase in activity. Like Richard says, we've had lots of conversations with 111. We continue to do so, and equally, I think our staff were getting a little bit unhappy about the activity in 111. And I think we held a joint Facebook Live, which I think was really helpful, because I think it busted some of the myths as well. Yeah. And I think that was a really good thing to do. We're committed to working with them. They're busy, we're busy, the system's busier, but we're committed to getting to the nub of why.
We haven't seen any specific trends. There's no increase in respiratory disease or...
It's more of everything, I think, really. I think one thing I did see, which was quite encouraging, we had a 2% increase in strokes, which I think I'm really pleased about, because that's part of the national sort of stroke campaign, I'm guessing, but I think that was a really quite nice thing to see. What we're seeing is more of everything, I think, really.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. VJ.
Thank you, Pauline. I was going to ask the question about reshaping operations. How's that going, the feedback? You've already touched on that, Dave. So talking about this pilot of time to care in the north and northeast of Lincolnshire, what's going through my head is that I take on board the points which have been made by the chair and by Karen, that we have to keep on moving. We have to continue to improve efficiencies and do things better and get to people sooner. However, Richard's already mentioned that we know that our workforce is tired. So there's a macro change happening, which although most of it is positive, but it's changed nevertheless. And along with that, there's a pilot running time to care. You've listed a number of initiatives. Some of them sound new to me and some of them I've heard before. And my question is, what challenges do you see in terms of how some of this would land on very tired workforce? And what's behind the question is not whether we do it, it's probably more operationally how.
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a lot in that, Vijay. I can probably talk for a couple of hours on that. I think firstly, within those initiatives, there's a couple of initiatives there which is about what the staff are asking for. They were asking about the end of shift finishing times. Well, we've firmed that up so that we keep them in their division rather than sending elsewhere at the end of the shift. So that's kind of giving something back, if I was honest, around just being more efficient, but equally recognising they want to get off on time. That's a good thing to do. And equally around the blue light C3 response, they've been saying for a very long time, can we look at this? And we have done. So we're trying to almost give and take on this one. Now, you need I think, for me, an enthused management team to enact this. And I think with the positive feedback we've had from this reshaping operations, we have got an enthused management team it's a real fine balance between putting a new management structure in, but equally keeping a team on board. And at the moment, I think we're managing that. There's lots of people quite enthused about the opportunities that are coming up for them. A main underpinning sort of driver for us is around compassionate leadership. So leaders who are, firm but fair, I think is probably the simple Yorkshire version of that. But I think it's putting compassionate leaders in it who are going to be working with staff in these local areas to say, you're an outlier. Why are you an outlier? Can we help you with this? Can you help us with this? So that's been the ethos of what we've been trying to do.
Thank you, Dave. Are there any other questions? Stuart, is yours a legacy hand?
According to my system, my hand's down, so I don't know what's
It is
going
now.
on.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions or comments before we leave the Chief Exec's report?
But Karen's is up.
Karen's is up. It's not on my screen. Okay, it is now. Yeah.
Sorry, Pauline.
It's okay.
It was just going back to Dave, really, on, and I quote your words, we're just getting more of everything. Have we as an organisation had a look at or took account of the reduced primary care activity? Because just from a personal point of view, I know for a fact that my GP only takes calls between 9 and 11. So that very issue, I know, just speaking with other colleagues across the system, certainly in the COVID marketplace, there is just not the access. And I just wondered if we've got the opportunity to feed back into primary care about their accessibility and availability for people to access primary care. So, and I guess that might also influence why 111's busier. Just my take.
No, Karen, I think that's a good take, and I think we've been looking at it in detail. I from what I've seen, I don't think perhaps the primary care are fully flying at the moment. That just may be one element. There's several other elements to this, and I think that just may be one element that we're currently looking at.
This is also an area where we will have to maintain our focus with the A&E delivery boards, the system oversight groups. Obviously, we have our strategic delivery board with the commissioning CCGs from across the region, and that's kind of changing and developing with the coming together of various CCG groups. This is clearly for the system. We need to better understand 111 first. What is that doing? What are the drivers of demand there? And of course, the concept of utilising 111 prior to an ED attendance will have an impact. And what we have to do is keep ensuring that we are on top of this data and we're responding, reacting and engaging at that system level. But because what Karen's just described is, I think we see that in many bits of the East Midlands where there is varying different access to primary care, also different utilisation of primary care, and that will invariably have an impact on other types of services, including ambulance. But we'll continue to keep the board updated.
Just on that point, before we leave this, because in terms of the whole Chief Exec's report, the fact that we've seen an increase in activity of over 13% is the bit that worries me most. And like I say, it's not sustainable. No. So we need the evidence base that demonstrates what's driving demand, so that we can take that back into the systems and get the message across that 13% activity increase is not sustainable. These are the reasons that we've identified that's driving demand. What can we do about it together as systems to drive down that demand? So I think that piece of work, really getting underneath what's driving the demand and having the evidence there to take back into the systems, really needs to be a piece of work that the team do. Yeah, so for reassurance, Pauline, that is something which is an ongoing piece of work which we're all heavily involved with. Okay. And only in our most recent strategic delivery board with the commissioners was it focused around increases in activity, and Chris Clayton, who's the lead AO for the piece of work, was also equally promoting and encouraging this is focused on. Great, that's good to hear. I think we'll come back to this issue about activity, increasing activity, when we come to the BAF, Karen, because a lot of the risks in the respond section of the BAF are all about resources to meet demand. So I think we need to come back to that a bit when we get to the BAF. So if there are no further questions or comments for the Chief Exec's report, I'd like to thank Richard and Dave and Kerry for the update, and we'll move straight on if that's okay with colleagues. The next item of the agenda then is the transformation programme update. Will, again, assume we've read it, just either go straight to questions or pull out the key points.
Okay, thanks very much, Pauline. So all I'd say in terms of introducing this report today is that you'll see that there is no amber in the report for this time, as we talked about last time. I would quote a prior NED colleague, but I won't do. I think anyone who knows what I'm talking about. And hopefully that's made it slightly more easy to understand as we go through it. The only things which really are of note as we go through, which I wanted to pull out, were a couple of resourcing issues in terms of leadership of some of the IM&T projects, but we're prioritising the critical projects for the organisation. So things like the telephony project, the rollout of personal devices, etc., etc. The previous EPRs, which is listed in the digital transformation projects, I'm pleased to report those issues which showed that as red at the time of writing of this report have been ironed out, and that has gone live now. So the frontline crews that we have do have the ability now to be able to look at previous EPRs which have been generated for that patient when they're on the scene, which is a great clinical advantage for them to obviously understand the prior care that's been given. In terms of the rest of the report, you will see that there's some information there on the hospital handover collaborative. I know Ben's been heavily involved with the kind of the emerging nature of that particular project, and unfortunately Ben isn't with us today in terms of additional detail, but if there's any questions on that specifically, I'm more than happy to take those away and report back to the board in due course. Finally, just walking through the further aspects of the dashboard. So from a corporate perspective, obviously there's work going on and continuing to go on around the long-term plan for EOCs and social distancing, and kind of locking in a lot of the changes which we've made, which is the premises work stream. We're just looking at appropriate funding streams for that and just finalising what is required. And the spread of infection, so preventing spread of infection programme at the bottom, that has just been sorting out in terms of governance and just overall leadership for that programme. And we're just in the final throes now of trying to work through how that's going to start formally. What I would say as part of the programme is we've obviously gone through a period of time through our board development sessions in terms of pulling together our new strategic objectives, just refreshing and making sure that they're right and appropriate. And then obviously that has a knock-on effect to our transformation that we have in the organisation. So what I'd like, Chair, if possible, for the next Trust Board, what I'd like to do is bring back a summary report of those new strategic objectives to sign those off. I think we're in a position as a Trust Board, informally through board development, that we've done that development work, but we do need to finalise them and formalise them in the organisation, and then obviously present and propose what that impact has on our transformation programme and our priorities as we go forward. So happy to leave it there and take any questions.
Well, that last point, Will, yeah, absolutely. Let's do that for the next board meeting.
Thank you very much.
Any questions or comments for Will on the transformation paper update? Stuart?
Yeah, is the hands up thing literally not working? Because
no, it's up. It's just slow.
Okay,
it's just gone up.
That's okay. Possibly a fairly detailed question, for which I apologise, because I took a lot of comfort from the report overall. And if I've garbled something, Leon, I'm sure will put me right. But in the digital transformation, there's a couple of comments around end-of-life palliative care and GP Connect. And at our recent clinical, whatever we are, transformation, is that what we call transformation board, which I attended with Leon, there was conversation about possibly losing some of the GP Connect access, which I think was put in a rush for COVID, and then it might be taken away. And I just wanted to see if that was the case, and if it was, could we push back against it? But Will's shaking his head, so.
Leon's shaking his head.
Good. Okay.
Over our dead bodies.
Okay, good.
I commented around the fact that we had a break glass clause during COVID to override some of the data sharing agreements because of COVID. A lot of that, Stuart, was because they were some of the counties were playing catch up initially on the bringing in of the Sequin GP Connect. Some of the counties were a bit slower to sign up because of concerns about the data sharing. Obviously, as COVID came in, we were able to override that and just share the data. I think that everybody's seen the benefit of GP Connect across the system, and I would have thought there'd be very little pushback from system partners.
Brilliant. That's brilliant. I mean, linked really nicely to our case study that we heard earlier and much else. Yeah. So that's really positive. Thank you for that.
Great. Any other questions for Will Pope?
Thanks, Pauline. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Really helpful paper, Will, as always. Thank you. Do tell me if this is completely wrong, but when I was looking through the dashboard, I thought that it looked to me like the most reds were on a time scale, and I wondered if you would have a comment on that, and then whether that's right or wrong, and then if it's right, is it something that we can do something about by applying more resource, assuming it was available or we could get it, or is it timescale with third parties? And if that's the case, what should we do about that?
Okay, so you're absolutely right. Fair observation. There's a few points just to note with that then. So some of it is natural turnover of staff. So it's not a resourcing issue in terms of baseline investment. It's just having available staff to be able to complete the projects and going through a transition from one member of staff to a new member of staff. And obviously that causes a bit of delay. That's more around the digital programs. The other programs, we've had discussions in the executive team about going further faster. Effectively, because we're asking a lot of the small resources we have in terms of transformation in the organisation, and the executives have agreed investment into those programs to be able to move faster and move further with those. So and obviously this report doesn't reflect that those are in post yet. So in terms of those schemes having the resources they need to be able to move quicker, you're absolutely right, recognised by the executive team last month in the process of sourcing that additional support to be able to push those forward. The only other thing I would say is on that, there are a couple of things like primary care networks, for example, in the clinical side, which is also affected by external timescales shifting as well, because either new guidance comes out, which means you have to rework your approach, or that there's kind of different stakeholder pressures which apply to some of these projects as well. So we have to kind of twist and turn with those at the same time.
That's helpful. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Will. Just on that point, Will, about primary care networks, there's a statement in the report about first contact paramedics, and I think it says that there's a danger that PCNs feel that we're not engaging with them. I'm not sure what that means, though, and why would the PCNs believe that we don't want to engage with them?
So there's been quite a lot of work done since this report was written, because obviously it was written at a point in time ready for papers for board, and the challenge we had is a very small central resource at trying to engage with nearly 100 PCNs across our entire patch in the East Midlands. So it was more of a being able to get round everyone, have a meaningful conversation everywhere, etc. So that was where that particular challenge came from. What we've agreed, though, through the conversations which have happened over the last month and subsequent to this report being written, is that we're going to be utilising some of the divisional leaders in a much more meaningful way in terms of engaging with their own local counties and local systems alongside that central resource that we've got, because quite rightly the general managers were coming to us and saying, you know, we're being approached about primary care networks directly, you know, when are you going to go and talk to them? So it needed a much integrated approach. So we've kind of shone a mirror or held a mirror up to ourselves internally between the divisions and the central team that's working on primary care network support, and worked out a good solution there where we're utilising and working with the divisions a lot more in terms of that local engagement. So pretty much mitigated in terms of how it's been described in this report.
Thanks for that, Will, because I think I was on a call recently, and I think you might have been on it, Will, where I think it was in Leicestershire. They were talking about a meeting with the PCNs and the division to talk exactly about this issue, and that they'd set it up, and they were looking forward to that conversation. So that's great that we've mitigated that. Stuart.
If I come in on that, probably just sorry to interrupt, but it's something I actually intended to mention but forgot, because something else that came up at the Clinical Transformation Board, which I thought was worth the board hearing, and we've kind of got there, even though I forgot to raise it, was because of the accelerated timescale on the community paramedic stuff. We've kind of had a case study in how we deal with all these, how many hundred there are PCNs, and I think the point that was made, and it sounds like Will's very much on the case, is that this is kind of a case study of how we can deal with so many things, because it's still not entirely clear what role PCNs are going to have on other topics. So it's encouraging to hear that it's, you know, we're building ways to deal with them through a real live case study, in a sense.
The only thing I'd probably say to that, Stuart, is just ask again in a month's time. I don't know whether I'd class it as a case study example just yet. ask again in a month's time.
What I meant was we're having to do it for the community paramedics. Yes. It's not a desk exercise. It's for real.
For real.
Whether it becomes a good or bad case study, how we achieve it, we'll wait and see with bated breath.
Okay, thank you very much. If there are no further questions, we'll take this report for assurance.
Pauline, I think Gary's got his hand up. Sorry.
I think Gary.
No, I put it up from the start, but I think I'm not sure whether you're seeing it or not.
Oh, sorry, Gary.
You just asked my question, Pauline. Well, you only asked about PCNs and the risk of being perceived not engaging, so you've answered it. So thank you.
I'm sorry I missed your hand. It's good to see you anyway.
I shan't take it personally.
Okay, so thank you very much. We'll take this report for assurance. And colleagues, happy just to carry straight on? Yeah, okay. The next item on the agenda then is the quality improvement strategy progress update, which again has come for assurance, and I think it's Nicola that's going to just lead this for us. Again, Nicola, assume that we've read it and just bring out any key points. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you very much. So this is the position at the end of year one. You'll see from the report that despite the challenges of the last year, we have delivered on the majority of the actions that we identified as priorities in year one. And that has had a really positive impact on the metrics that you'll remember we identified across each of the 5 domains to monitor how well we are doing on the strategy. So 76% of those metrics, 44 out of 58, have improved from the 2019-20 baseline as our end of year one of a 5-year strategy. So just a really positive position. I think most pleasingly of all, given that the main sort of thrust of the strategy was about significantly changing our culture, is the fact that the 17 staff opinion survey questions that we identified to monitor the impact of the strategy have all improved, some of them significantly so, up to sort of 10% improvement points. So I just wanted to leave it there. We have included this as an appendix in the equality account, which is just gone out to stakeholders for their commentary. So I think it will give our stakeholders a real feel for the journey that we've taken in the last year. And just while I'm on the subject of the quality account, we've had an email last week advising that the previous decision to relax the 30th of June deadline for publication has now been changed. So there is now an expectation that we will publish on the 30th of June, which means that I do need to request as part of this item delegated authority for QGC to approve the final version, which it will receive next month, so that we can meet the publication deadline. And I have circulated a copy of it to all of you. So I'll leave it there. I'm very happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before we go to questions, can we just agree the delegated authority to the Clinical Governance Committee to approve the quality account on our behalf. We've all had an opportunity to see it and to comment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. We'll do that.
So
and then
QGC rather than clinical governance, Pauline?
what did I say?
You said clinical governance, was it quality governance? I think you
meant. Yes.
Yeah,
that's what I meant, Stuart. Thank you very much.
And we did have a look at the early draft, and it reads really well already, which is great. So there's been a positive feedback there to Nicola.
Great, thank you. And we'll go straight to questions then. Any questions for Nicola or any comments?
Paul, the only comment I would add is, echoing what Nicola has described. It's a really good news story when you look at the metrics of what's been delivered and achieved over the past 12 months. And again, greatest admiration and respect to everyone who's been involved in delivering against each of those. A fantastic achievement. It
is actually, if you think about it, in the most turbulent year that the whole of the NHS has experienced, to get such positive progress is really encouraging. Parminder, I think you've got a question.
Thank you, Pauline. Obviously, this is my first time on looking at this report, and I'm looking at the metrics. Forgive me for my ignorance or naivety on this, but when I was looking at the metrics and I was looking at the direction of travel, I can understand it. I can look at the merit data, which tells me which way it's going. But then there's the improving and deteriorating with the arrows going up and down. Now, I was a bit confused to say, well, okay, if it's deteriorating and the arrow's going up, that means it's deteriorating very, very quickly. But what I guess my question is, and this is where I was testing myself, should I be concerned? So the arrow's going up, it's deteriorating, and I can tell by the metrics that the numbers have gone up or gone down in the wrong direction. But what should I take away from this to ensure that how bad is it deteriorating?
Should you be worried about the level of deterioration? Is it a cause for concern, Nicola?
No, I think we need to remember that this is end of year one of a 5-year strategy. So we want this to improve over the 5 years. I think it's remarkable that we've achieved improvement in 76% of the metrics at the end of year one. I'd be happy if we'd achieved 100% by the end of year 5, and I think we're moving in a really good direction. So no, there's nothing on here that is of particular concern to me. The ones where there has been a deteriorating position, by and large, that can be attributed to the additional pressures of COVID. So, for example, things like Staten Man training, appraisal rates, those have been significantly impacted, as we've talked about at Trust Board previously. So I think there's an explanation for those that are deteriorating. And I think, we've still got 4 years of this strategy left to run. I think it's a really good accelerated start in a year that, as Richard and Pauline have said, has been a difficult year for all sorts of reasons. So I'm very encouraged by the change.
Does that answer your question, Parminder? I see you frowning a bit.
Yeah. I totally understand that this is a
question of clarification on that. Because I think, Parminder, you were suggesting that an arrow up and deteriorating implied deteriorating was getting worse. I don't think that is the case.
No,
an
it's
up
not.
simply means which way's the data gone.
Yes,
and up sometimes
so
up is deteriorating, sometimes
better.
up is improving. So yes. I don't think the arrow is a rate of change thing. I may have misunderstood your question, Parminder, but
no, thank you, Stuart. That's exactly what I'm asking. That we've got in some instances we've got deteriorating and the arrow's going up.
That simply means that the data has gone up, the number has gone up.
Yeah.
And that is a deterioration, rather than being the case that the number going up is an improvement.
Right.
I think, can I make a suggestion on this one there? I absolutely. So I think the summary from Nicola is not a cause for concern. I think for future iterations, we probably just need a scale or a key which explains the parameters. Because for some, depending on how you read this, then I can understand how some people may see that. Is it a worrying deterioration, or is it an improving position from a deterioration? I think we just need a scale which quantifies it. Yeah.
That's helpful. So for the next annual report on progress, just a bit more work around that improving stroke, deteriorating, arrows and colours, I think would be helpful. Okay, thank you. I've just got one question, Nicola, and I'm not sure if it's for you to answer or whether it's Dave, and it's about, in the report, one of the areas where there's been some deterioration is on scene times. And we've looked at that in other sections of the agenda on previous occasions. I'm just wondering if we understand, Dave, what's driven or what's driving this deterioration in on-scene times. Have we done a piece of work to get beneath what the causation is?
Dave,
you're on mute, Dave.
There you go. I think we're always working on that one, Pauline, because I think on-scene time is a variable, and I think it's been a really difficult variable in the COVID year because can you imagine people are working in full PPE or whatever? I think it probably would be unfair to say why it's going up. That may be a factor. Another factor may be that they're actually actively sourcing alternatives, which invariably means sometimes you're on scene longer. I think we're just trying to pull out some of the data to really get a true picture of this. It may not be just down to, sat around and bad clinical practice. It may be some really positive factors that we just need to make sure we're mindful of.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And it's assuring that you're onto it and looking at it, because it would at some point be really good to see a report that shows us what the causation is for deterioration in on-scene time, because there might be good causes. It might be that we've got some fantastic practitioners out there that are looking for alternative pathways, and that means they're on scene longer. Yeah. So understanding that causation, I think, for the board would be quite helpful in the future.
Yeah, what we also have to do as part of the efficiency programme is to make sure that the metric is considered in the light of call cycle, because on-scene time is one metric of that, and actually being on scene longer but your call cycle being reduced because you're not conveyed to hospital is a positive metric. And David's absolutely right. Over this past year, we have to take into consideration sort of the donning and doffing of PPE and all of the additional requirements that have come with that, which also impacts on call cycle time, for example, cleaning of vehicles, etc. So I think last year is a bit of a false metric comparison, but yeah, absolutely moving forward, the whole efficiency piece will focus on this.
Great, thank you. So if there are no further comments or questions for, I forgot who was who wrote the report, Nicola, we'll take that report for assurance. Thank you very much. Okay. And then another report which is coming to us for assurance is progress on the people plan. Kerry, again, assume we've read it and just draw our attention to any key points.
Thank you, Chair. So the key points really then are, we agreed at a previous meeting the four key areas that we needed to focus our attention on in relation to the NHS people plan, and agreed an action plan. So in the paper really I have set out the progress that we have made to date in relation to those four key areas. So we have seen some increase in terms of flexibility within the organisation, but we still have a lot more work to do, and that those actions remain ongoing. We have seen an increase in terms of our ethnicity profile. However, that has not achieved the 0.5% that we per year that we agreed in our equality strategy. So we have commenced an independent review with 360 Assurance, and that work is in progress at the moment. And we have started to do some work, particularly with one of our higher education institute partners, working with a previous member of the National Workforce Race Equality Standard team, who is working with us and one of the universities to try to identify the factors that are impacting on a low rate of students from a BAME background on paramedic programmes, because that is one of our key supply routes. So that work is in progress. And the staff opinion survey increase in the staff engagement score, and the increase that we've seen in terms of the Freedom to Speak Up index. So all the information is in the report. There's a lot of detail there, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Kerry. Thank you. Questions or comments for Kerry on the report? VJ.
Thank you, Pauline. I'm not sure if you can see my raised hand either.
I can, yeah. I know I can see it's there.
Thank you. Carrie, thank you very much for a report. It's not so much a question, it's an observation and a comment. What I notice, a lot of good progress has been made in a number of areas, whether it's the sickness management or conversations with higher education institutions regarding the recruitment of the students, and also obviously you've just mentioned the freedom to speak up and the rollout of new appraisal approach. There's a lot of positive stuff. One thing which I would pull out is I was observing and listening into Ben's manager's briefing at the height of pandemic, and I saw there was a COVID risk assessment for all staff. And I think it was a bit of a master class which was delivered by Nilesh Sutaria in terms of how to engage senior managers to get them to do something which was well over and above. They were really stretched out. And it was a good example of how even in difficult and challenging circumstances, staff and senior managers can be engaged. And I think sometimes when we do good work, it goes unnoticed. We just take it for granted, and it just needs to be acknowledged. And finally, I look forward to the piece of work which we have commissioned from 360, and I hope it brings the rigor and expertise and insight that we are looking for to assure us and our staff that we are on the right lines and that we really are very transparent in the way we do things. So I really look forward to that.
Thank you, VJ. Any other questions or comments for VJ? For Kerry on the paper? Will, Leg, you've got your hand up, I think.
Yeah. Yes, I have both my physical one and my virtual. It's just a quick question, if I may. Page 7 in here talks about flexible working, and when I first read this report, I thought, how on earth can we be amber at flexible working, considering everything that's gone on in the last 12 months in our response to COVID? And then clearly, as it states in the paper, it's talking more about frontline opportunities and our clinical workforce. And I'm just wondering whether there's either other areas of best practice which we could learn from for this, or any other ambulance service, Kerry, that you kind of aspire to be like when it comes to a clinical flexibilities and clinical frontline workforce. But I'm sitting here thinking, how on earth do we move the dial on the clinical bit of this, given the nature of service that we are? And I just wondered if you had any thoughts.
Yeah. Kerry, could I just add to that question so I don't come in with another one? Because when I read this, it was the flexible working bit that I focused on, and I wondered if we'd set a target. So, have we set an ambitious target for the percentage of clinical frontline staff that get the opportunity to work flexibly?
And shall I start with that one, Pauline? We haven't got a target of frontline staff who would work flexibly, because what the people plan is saying is that all staff, clinical and non-clinical, should be able to work flexibly if they so wish and need to do so. So it's not about having a target as such. What we need to do is to try to ensure that our approach, our procedures support people to work flexibly. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that we can give everybody exactly what they want, because if everybody in the organisation only ever wants to work days or Tuesday to Thursday, then obviously we can't function as an organisation in a climate of 24/7 delivery. So it's about what can we do to provide the opportunity for flexible working. So one of the things we've done as part of the work to date is we've done a small survey with staff, and we've had over 200 responses from staff, and they are very mixed in terms of, they really go from the extreme of the organisation needs to move a long way in terms of supporting flexible working, to responses around from individuals who have been supported to work flexibly. And I'm talking frontline clinical staff being supported to work flexibly. So there's a real variety in terms of what we've had and what we've been able to support. So far, I've been working with a number of managers from across operational areas and sought feedback from those individuals, but then also from staff in terms of their experience. And the next step really is to, I'll be meeting with David and a few colleagues, David Williams and a few senior operational colleagues. And one of those individuals is also somebody who has worked in a different NHS environment, and to give their perspective on how they have managed flexible working for frontline roles in different sectors of the NHS. Now, obviously, further steps include going wider to look at what else could we do. But it's split into two parts, really. What can we do within our existing rota provisions as such? So what can we do to maximise the current approach? And actually then looking at it from a very different perspective that said, if we started with a blank sheet of paper and designed the service from a blank sheet of paper, would we design it the way we're designing it now, the way we have it now? So this is a longer term project because we still have to, of course, deliver 24/7. And so it is quite a challenging one for a service such as ours, but there is no doubt that we are committed to try to increase the flexible working opportunities that we make available, whilst also continuing to provide a service that matches demand across a 24/7 period. I hope that's answered the questions, and apologies if I've missed something.
Kerry, is there any other ambulance service doing better than we are in terms of flexible working for frontline clinicians?
Not when you look at the staff opinion survey outcomes, that they're very similar. We've made an improvement this year, but it's only just a few points in it as such when you look at the staff opinion survey.
I seem to remember at an ACE conference somebody presenting a piece of work, I think it was Sheffield University, where they'd done a piece of work on understanding the paramedic workforce and whether or not they wanted flexible working. And I'm going back now probably 2 years, and I think the view then was that overall there wasn't a great demand for flexible working amongst the paramedic workforce.
I'm not familiar with that study, Pauline, but suggestions from the staff survey responses that we've had would suggest that actually staff do want increased flexible working opportunities. And what we do know is that flexible working supports improvements in health and well-being. And, you know, and I think people have different views on what flexible working might mean as well. Yeah. You know, so I think there are a group of staff within an organisation such as ours that are very used to working in a certain way, and that's their expectation upon working within a service such as ours. What we see now is that individuals entering the service now have a very different view on what they want in terms of.
That's a really good point.
Portfolio careers, etc. So we've very much got to look at what opportunities can we create that supports the different needs of different members of our workforce.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good point, Kerry. Thank you. VJ, is yours a legacy hand or a new question?
It's a legacy hand. In fact, it's not even a hand on my screen. So.
Okay. These hands are going to drive me to the day. Are there any other questions or comments?
Just a comment, please.
With or without hands?
Yeah, Leon, I've got my...
Leon, and then I'll come to you, Richard. Yeah. Okay, Leon, got you.
Yeah, just practically, just to re-emphasise what Kerry's just said and being positive, Chair, with the new recruitment of the SPs, HR have worked brilliantly with Ops to discuss flexible arrangements about talent. And we had 3 senior lecturers in universities that wanted to look at portfolio, part-time working and flexible working. And most certainly, we didn't want to lose that clinical expertise in our specialist practitioner workforce. And I know just a very small example, they're very open-minded to how we retain that talent, having recruited them, and how we can get them working flexibly at EMAS. So I just wanted to thank them for doing that.
That's great feedback. Thank you, Leon. Richard.
Yeah, thank you. It was just very similar to on the previous paper, Kerry and team, just a recognition of how much has been achieved through the past years. It's another example, despite all that has been happening. Such positive movement in quite a number of indicators is great to see, and I know we've got further agenda items in a few moments, which we'll look at things in further detail. But just again, another area of recognition. And sorry, I've got a hand up as well.
Okay, Karen.
Thanks. These hands are driving me mad as well, Pauline. It was on your last page, Kerry, number 11, on the clinical supervision framework. Now, obviously, I can see that, it's work in progress. I just wondered if this is being taken account into the management restructuring, because what we know from the past, and it continues to be present in terms of operational staff and the way that they are clinically supervised in order to deliver. So I just wondered, is it being thought of through the restructuring programme, particularly in the operational environment? And secondly, do we have any idea on a timeline around it?
Thank you, Karen. I can see Leon's nodding away and wants to come in there because he leads on this particular project. So do you want to come in, Leon?
Yeah, thanks, Karen. Essentially, the two elements to it. One is capacity and one is the operational restructure. And Dave absolutely spelt out that the operational restructure and the positivity around it is designed to really embed and support clinical supervision and leadership. But this bit of work for me, it goes far wider than that, and it talks about clinical supervision and clinical appraisal of our staff, and that requires the new people in post in those new clinical leadership roles in order to really spell out what good appraisal looks like at EMAS. So I've actually, I think 2 weeks ago, met with Kerry's education team and the senior educationalists about how the medical director work closer together with education. And then it will be getting everybody together in one room when we've got all the staff present in order to spell out the direction for EMAS. I haven't got a time frame at the moment. We've been concentrating on those other work streams, but it is as important as the others, and that's why it's a priority area on the people plan.
Okay, thanks very much.
I guess I'll be setting one.
Thank you very much. So, are we happy to receive this paper for assurance? We've had a good discussion about it and excellent progress. Well done, Kerry and her team. I'm going to suggest we carry on and finish this section of the agenda. So it's the contracting and planning guidance, and then we'll take a short break because I'm desperate for a drink of water. My hay fever tablets are really kicking in now. So straight over to Mike.
Yeah, thanks very much. I need to take my hay fever tablets. My eyes itchy like hell, actually, so it'd be a very opportune break. This is coming back to board because the board gave Richard and I delegated powers to approve a plan for the first 3 months of the year. Since that board meeting, the rules have changed again, and the allocations are now for the first half of the year, H1. And as we indicated earlier, the key point for us is going to be H2. Let's come on to that in a second. So H1 is very much, this is what you're getting as an organisation. It's being decided centrally based upon run rates of the previous year. We build all our CCGs, and apart from a couple of technical issues, we've received all the money due to us for April. So by de facto, that's you take that as being agreed now with each of the CCGs. I put an indicative plan on the back, so it shows that this level of income should allow us to continue our present level of expenditure. The usual caveats about maintaining those levels of expenditure going forward for the first half of the year. Put an indicative capital plan in as well. That's very much indicative because we haven't sorted capital allocations out yet. Capital allocations are going to STPs, not to trusts, and that's why we haven't sorted out. So it's a bit of a discussion with ourselves and other organisations in the STP about capital allocations. So in summary, the money given for H1 should be sufficient for us to continue our current levels of expenditure. Within that, we've got COVID at just over $1 million. That we've been told is expected to drop down to zero in the second half of the year. So one of our challenges now is about weaning ourselves off the COVID expenditure, particularly some of the large amounts of money we're spending on PAS. But of course, the second half of the year, it's a new ball game in relation to activity levels. We are funded at the activity levels of the original activity plan of a year or 2 years ago now. So that will start again in terms of the process. So H2 we don't know much about yet. Lots of guidance going to be coming out. H1, that's the allocation being given to us. It's been given to the CCGs. It should be sufficient to see us through the first half of the year.
Thanks very much, Mike. Thank you. Any questions or comments for Mike? Karen, I can see you waving at me.
It's the easiest way. Yeah, I just kind of wanted to, and I know we've got FPC updates later, but in terms of the COVID funding, we discussed this last week at the Finance and Performance Committee, and it was just to give the reassurance to the board that we've asked for a specific programme of wind down on that and how we're actually going to see in terms of what we funded this year and what we're going to go on to in H2. So I think that's going to be quite an interesting piece of work.
Thank you. Mike, can I just ask you, if I'm understanding this right, the top-up payments, the inflation, the CNST stuff and the COVID-19 funding, that's going direct to the STP, is it? And does that mean, because it's going into Derbyshire and because we're part of them, we're a challenged system financially, that any of that money is at risk?
Well, actually, that's a very, very good question, because and your point about being a challenged financial system is a key one, and as the board is probably aware, but if they're not, they will be now. We are one of the challenged financial systems in the country, and there's a bit of a spotlight being raised by the NHS upon the Derbyshire. At the moment, I think they're all at risk. It'd be fair to say. These are system totals, system allocations. So at the moment, I don't think there's any risk of not getting them, but there's always this risk that there will be some clawback. But the planning I've been doing with the director of the finance within the STP shows that H1, the system is about right. It's not a million miles off. It's when you start going forward a bit from H2 onwards and getting to underlying positions, resetting allocations and budgets, that's when the numbers get really, really bad. So, as I said, the risk in H2 is low. Now, the top-up funding, although it looks large, is actually most of that is PTS. So we get that, and if we don't get it, we don't do the PTS, and that's mainly for Derbyshire and Northamptonshire. You never come to that, but that's a separate item. So although it's a big amount, their risk is quite low. The inflation, I think, is going to be one that's going to cause the most hassle, I think, because there is an expectation going forward that ambulance trusts receive a differential inflation, particularly around, if you remember, the upgrading the band 5 to band 6 paramedics. That has a disproportionate effect on inflation for ambulance trusts. So we should be receiving more inflation in H2 than the standard national inflation. But again, these are all subject to negotiations, particularly around activity increases, etc.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Any other questions for Mike before we go to the recommendations? No. Okay, so we're asked to consider the financial plan approved by the Chief Exec Director of Finance, and we've got that in front of us. To note the update in relation to the contracting and planning guidance, and we've heard that it's in two parts, H1 and H2. Delegate authority to the Chief Exec Director of Finance to approve a revised capital plan for 2021-22. Are we happy to delegate that authority? Karen, have you got your hand up? No. Supporting it. Thank you. Right. And then delegate authority to the Chief Exec, the Director of Finance, to approve the Trust financial plan for the first half and to approve the half-year plan submission, which will form part of the Derbyshire system. Now, I wonder if there's a potential for the Finance and Performance Committee to have seen that draft plan before it's finalised by Richard and Mike. Is that possible, Mike?
It is. They already saw it last F&P actually, which hasn't really moved on from there. So they've seen it and considered it as part of the original submission for the quarter one. I think the timing's got this year because we've got to get the first planning by, I think it's the 3rd of June, although submission's not due till after that. So what we can do is take it to F&P to consider it. But the reality is it's going to bounce back to this number. It's what we're given. So there's not much you can, I know it sounds awful, there's not much you can really do about it. This is the NHS policy, this is what you're going to get. So we can do that. I think, you know, H1 is what's given. I think H2 is where the key bits in terms of our internal governance will kick in, because there will be some big decisions to make there, particularly around our contract. But I could take it to F&P without problem. Our first submission date before the next F&P, unfortunately.
Okay, I think that would be helpful if it could go through F&P.
Yeah, sorry, Mike, did you just say that the next F&P is after the submission date?
It's where are we now?
No, it's the 25th of June, 25th of May. So we'll get it.
Pardon. Yes. I think in that case, not a problem, Chairman.
Thank you. Glad to hear it. Great.
I've got my dates wrong. Sorry.
Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you for all the hard work that's gone into that piece of work. Can I suggest we take a short break now so I can go and get a glass of water? Don't log off, just go and stretch your legs and come back and we'll get straight back on with it. Thank you. The next section on the agenda was the assurance section, and the first item is an update for insurance on the introduction of the Wellbeing Guardian role. Kerry, take it as read, draw out any key points. Thank you.
Thank you, Pauline. So the last update we received on the Wellbeing Guardian was back in November, and I think colleagues will recall that Paminda is our Wellbeing Guardian. We have now had sight of national documentation that sets out a process of self-assessment for organisations and sets out 9 board principles reflecting the role of the Wellbeing Guardian. So myself, Paminda and colleagues from across the organisation met to work through our current position in relation to these principles to understand really where we were as an organisation in terms of the national documentation. So the paper sets out all the information, and through the work that we did, myself and Paminda really determined that as an organisation we had exceeded phase 1 and were working towards phase 2, and that was very much based upon the fact that we have a Wellbeing Guardian role that is established and functioning well at our board. Most of the principles we've evidenced, and Appendix 1 sets out a summary of where we feel we have some gaps to address in terms of health and well-being. And in terms of just looking at some of the evidence that we use to give assurance around health and well-being, including the staff opinion surveys and cultural audits that we've undertaken in the past and will be undertaking again during this year too. So happy to take any questions on the paper, but a full summary is provided.
Thank you, Kerry. Are we still recording?
Yes.
It's just that I couldn't see the red light.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's still there. Okay, great. Just checking. Okay, straight over for questions then. Any questions or comments for Kerry or for Paminda in that regard? I've got a couple of questions, Kerry and Paminda, and possibly even VJ. The first question for me is there a clear understanding of the difference between the Wellbeing Guardian role and the freedom to speak up non-executive lead? Is it clearly understood amongst the people that are doing it, first and foremost, but also within the organisation?
I'm happy to start on the response to that, Pauline. Paminda and VJ may wish to comment as well, but I believe there is a clear distinction in that the national guidance sets out these key principles specific to the Wellbeing Guardian that differs to the role of the Freedom to Speak Up Guardian. And the role of the Freedom to Speak Up Guardian, again, I think is very clear through the national documentation and through the National Wellbeing Guardian, the National Freedom to Speak Up Guardian's office. So I think there is clear distinction. It would be interesting to hear whether Paminda and VJ feel that there is that level of understanding in those roles.
VJ, do you want to go first? Or?
Okay, thank you, Pauline. So my understanding is that there is clear distinction between the two roles. However, that's not to say that there could not be convergence at some point. For example, if it's the freedom to speak up matter, that there would be health and well-being issues which would start filtering into it. However, I don't see that as problematic or something which is insurmountable. I think it merits having conversations and talking to colleagues. So I'm comfortable with it. I don't see any major issue there.
Thank you, Vijay.
Thank you, Pauline. Yes, I'd echo what both Kerry and Vijay have said, but it's a great observation. And it's quite ironic because I attended a Midlands regional event last week, and my fellow colleagues that were there, that some of those had that double hat on. Right. They were both the lead for the freedom to speak as well as the wellbeing guardian. Yeah. And that was quite interesting because I raised the question, as well, you know, as we've introduced ourselves, there's a number of people, not just a handful, but 2 or 3 people that said that they were both the freedom to speak and the wellbeing guardian. And I said, well, you know, I'd be interested to know, is that does that have merit, and is that a better way of doing it? But I think all organisations are doing what's right for them and what works well for them, and I think we need to remember that whilst in some organisations that's a better fit and they've gone with that approach, here, I mean, as Kerry has said, I think it would be good to test it with our colleagues to see, well, do they understand, is there a differentiation, and does there need to be a differentiation? Because at the end of the day, it's all under that one umbrella of well-being and for our staff. So does it matter if they think of freedom to speak, or do they think of well-being, as long as they feel that they've got a place to go to for their concerns? But I think as we evolve with this, and as we continue going forward, perhaps that's where Vijay and I need to have perhaps more dialogue with Kerry and with Nilesh, and see what's, you know, what are we hearing here at board level, and also then what are we hearing on the ground.
Thank you for that. It's interesting. I think the question I've got when I read the principles and the responsibilities is whether or not, as a board, we should be receiving a report direct from the wellbeing guardian.
It doesn't
rather than through the executive. You see where I'm coming from, Kerry?
Yeah, it certainly doesn't set that out within any of the documents. It's not a clear expectation, but the role of the wellbeing guardian is primarily to provide assurance to the trust board.
Yeah,
and I suppose it comes back to the question of what would the board feel gives them the most assurance. Is it the discussion that's held at board that shows that wellbeing is high on the agenda and we are considering the wellbeing impact in terms of any decisions we make, etc., or is it a periodic report from the Guardian? And I think that's entirely down to the board to determine what it feels would give them the most assurance.
I don't know if other colleagues have a view. I think the value is in the discussion rather than the paper, personally.
I think this is, Kerry, you probably recall a conversation you and I had when we talked about this is almost having our decisions that we make, or the conversation we have, the discussions we have, the well-being piece should be integrated. And when we talk about, well, can we do this? Well, have we got the finance for it? We immediately jump to that. And that's exactly the same thing that we should be thinking, well, what's the implications of this decision or this activity on the well-being? So it needs to be all kind of like integrated into that. So do we need a report to get to that stage, or do we just consciously as a board have it in the forefront of our minds that, oh, am I considering this for the well-being?
Thank you. I've got a few people wanting to come in. I think I saw Karen Sullivan, VJ, and yeah, I think that's it. Karen Sullivan and VJ.
Thank you, Chairman. Just from a governance point of view, I think it's probably worth reflecting on the difference between this and the freedom to speak up role. There, the Guardian isn't a board member, whereas the Wellbeing Guardian is a board member and so has easy access to raise issues with the board, doesn't need to wait for a report to come from the executive. So for me, I think there is a difference there, and therefore probably doesn't require a formal report in the way that we do from the Freedom to Speak Up Guardian.
Thank you, Karen. And VJ.
So, Chair, my perspective is that health and well-being, it's a massive agenda within the NHS at the moment. There's a lot of focus on it. We ourselves are looking at it in an innovative way. There's a lot going on there. So there is something to be said about having a report from Parminder. However, I would actually pedal away from that slightly, because I think it is a massive part of what Carrie and her team do and which is embedded within the organisation. We actually need to get the report from the exec lead for that. Where I think Parminder's role really adds value is for her to tell us, is she assured by what she's hearing and seeing, and also is able to triangulate that. And I think as the role beds down, it will become apparent to Parminder, as it did to me with the Freedom to Speak Up, where I'm able to then close the loop, triangulate that information and see, actually, when we got the feedback, for example, from somebody who had complained under the Freedom to Speak Up matter, and I think it will happen in time, but perhaps that's where we need to hear from Parminder in terms of assurance. Is she getting assurance from what she's seeing? But Carrie needs to be the lead in terms of reporting, because it's a huge part of what she's doing at the moment, along with many other things.
Thank you, VJ. Kerry.
Yeah, I suppose in response to that, one of the things we have done as part of the committee structure is we have a subgroup as part of the workforce committee, which is the Wellbeing and Inclusion group, and it's dedicated to the health and wellbeing and inclusion agenda. So the Workforce Committee are now receiving a record of business from that wellbeing subgroup, which details, all the current activity, what we do, what we talk about, the mechanisms we're putting in place to give that level of assurance to the Workforce Committee on a regular basis of all of this work around health and wellbeing, as well as equality and inclusion. And that's relatively new. We've only started doing that in this new financial year as a new subgroup of the Workforce Committee. But I think in time, that's the route where the Workforce Committee and hence the board will receive that assurance.
Yeah, thank you. I think that makes absolute sense. So thank you very much for that. Karen, did you want to come back in? Is your hand up again? No. OK, thank you. OK, well, thank you very much, everybody, for your contributions and discussion, and we're happy to take that report for assurance. Thank you. The next item on the agenda, again, is for assurance, and it's the staff opinion survey. Kerry.
Thank you, Chair. I recognise this is a very long paper and a lot of information, as well as the full national results. So I just think that the headlines really are the response rate of 50%, which was slightly lower than last year, but given the pandemic situation, I don't think is too much of a concern, although of course we would want to have a higher response rate. I think we've got some really positive results in the staff opinion survey, which I think are evident for everybody to see. Significantly better on 40 questions, no questions where we were significantly worse, and 35 where there was no significant difference. The questions, the report does include some questions in relation to the Workforce Race Equality Standard and the Workforce Disability Equality Standard, but it's not the full suite of information that's contained within the RES and the WDES. And a bit later on in the year, we will have a full analysis of both the RES and the DES that will feed into the Workforce Committee, which will include what's included in RES and DES from the staff opinion survey. As I say, there's a full kind of 6 or 7 year trend analysis in the report, so happy for colleagues to ask any questions in relation to those. But the report's really helped us to identify some key areas, again, where we want to focus attention, particularly around flexibility, as we've already talked about, civility and respect, and also continued development of our just and learning culture, which we can see we have already made some progress on. The report also includes the initial action plan that we're looking to implement, and the paper has been to the executive team and the workforce committee. I'm happy to take any questions, really. Thank you.
Thank you, Kerry. Any questions or comments for Kerry? VJ.
Thank you, Chair. So apart from the response rate on the staff survey, opinion survey, there are so many positives there. And I think, first of all, we just need to recognize that we are getting these results at the time when everybody was extremely challenged during pandemic. So I think it's a real credit to the entire organization to actually get the kind of responses we've got. And I think we really got to acknowledge that. When it comes to resin deaths, obviously, along with other colleagues, I'm concerned about that those indicators are pointing in the wrong direction in terms of, just picking up one where the BAME staff claimed that they've experienced more harassment and bullying from their colleagues. And I note in the actions, it talks about more civility and respect conversations and training. I think in 2021, I would suggest that perhaps my colleagues would consider how we can take it a step further to signal the seriousness of our intent and how strongly we feel about this, and we want to put it right and signal things like zero tolerance on this. I've had a conversation with the chief executive, so I'm very happy to leave it with Richard, but I think we need to take it a step further.
Just before you respond to that, Kerry, that was the point. Other than it being an absolutely excellent staff survey result, it really is probably the best one I've ever experienced anywhere I've worked in the NHS. The level of progress has been fantastic. But the thing that worries me is about the res and the DES. And I know we're going to see more information later in the year. But what went through my mind when I read it was that it's pretty static in EMAS, and it has been, looking back over the years, a pretty static response to the same questions. And I wonder if we need to do something radically different. I don't know what, but I'm not sure if more of the same, well, I know more of the same will give us the same result. So whether or not we need to think, is there something radically different that will make a difference in moving both, well, primarily the res scores more dramatically in the right direction?
Yeah, thank you, Paul. And on the back of that, and Vijay's absolutely right, we have spoken at length, and I'm confident we are continuing to take action in the right area. Both Kerry and I will equally had significant conversations around this topic, and Kerry has a number of actions which she's in the process of implementing to indeed do as you're describing, take things to another level, so we can do things, take more assertive action. I think this is probably worthy of further debate in another forum as well, and I'll be guided as to which is the most appropriate forum for that. But I think we all agree, we are all wanting to do the same thing. We're all wanting to see a significant improvement, and I'm confident we have the foundations to build upon, but disappointingly, we've not seen the progress that we would have liked over the past 12 months. Kerry, I don't know if there's anything you want to add on the back of some of the additional actions.
Yes, thank you. The action plan in the report focuses on the civility and respect on the back of the imminent publication of an NHS-wide civility and respect toolkit that all organisations need to look at and look at how they implement. So that was really one of the things in there. In relation to zero tolerance, well, I would argue we have zero tolerance already. It's not new, and any matters that are raised, whether it be under freedom to speak up or under employee relations, is appropriately addressed through those mechanisms. So I think the other thing that we're already doing, well, I know, not think, we've implemented a whole suite of equality, diversity and inclusion education and training to raise awareness and understanding across our workforce for our leaders and managers, but also all of our staff in terms of expectations and a series of equality briefings. So there should be no dispute that actually people and all staff understand actually what's expected, and we've integrated into the appraisal a focus on equality and inclusion and our trust values and the expectations of every individual working within the organisation as part of their appraisal. The network chairs are also now members of the Equality and Inclusion Group, so we have that regular forum where they can engage and share concerns and talk about and agree approaches together. And I think finally the piece of work that Richard spoke about was looking at ways in which we can add increased scrutiny through the recruitment and career progression processes. And, you know, I think this might be quite challenging for some in the organisation because it's putting additional checks and balances into the mechanisms where people such as myself or colleagues from my team are reviewing before enabling a role to progress to the next stage of recruitment. So really putting in that challenge around, is there diversity in the shortlist? Is there diversity, you know, in the application group, etc. So a whole host of things there that we're looking at. And I suppose the anomaly in all of this is that, interestingly, when you look at the results, the staff engagement score from our BAME colleagues is higher than the staff engagement score from our white colleagues. So there is a bit of a challenge in a way in terms of what the res data is saying versus the level of engagement of our colleagues, you know, in their response to other questions. So trying to get underneath all of that is always quite challenging with this sort of data. Nevertheless, Richard's absolutely right. We recognise that, you know, we have got to do some different stuff, and we've got to identify what those different things are, because we want to see the res indicators going in the right direction, and we want to see increased diversity in our organisation for a number of very valid reasons. So I think that's where I'll leave it, but yeah, happy to take any other points on it.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Pavinda?
Yes, thank you for that, because that was one of my questions on the EDIPs, and that's great to hear in terms of how do we move that agenda positively forward. The only other observation I made on it was more around the body cam pilot that's going to be implemented in Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire, and I was just wanted kind of a high level insight into why that's a pilot and how we're going to roll it out, or are there other ambulance trusts that are also using this, and etc. And how we got the level of engagement from our paramedics to be actually wearing these body cams, because there is a kind of privacy piece there as well that comes in.
Who was the best person to pick that up about the body cams?
Mike's team lead on the body cams. I'm not sure. Are you able to pick that up, Mike?
Yeah, fine. The body cams is part of a national initiative, so it's been funded nationally, rolled out across the ambulance service. There were some services in front of us, like London Ambulance Service, for instance, who have already used them as well. The reason why it's being piloted is we just got to start somewhere. We don't have a massive rollout and find some beats are wrong. So we put this pilot in one area, see how it goes, and then roll out across the rest of the trust. So we've got them in stock now. We've got the funding for them, so it's all ready to go. Just making certain we don't make any mistakes, and that's why we're piloting it.
So it's a national rollout of body cams for paramedics.
It's a nationally funded campaign, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and the money came through the back end of last year to allow us to A, buy the cameras, and B, pay for some of the storage of the data, which definitely sounds is more expensive than the cameras, but that's where we're at, yeah.
I think what's really important with this is that we, as we slowly roll this out, because this is absolutely the right thing to be doing. This is for frontline colleagues who have been subjected to completely unacceptable levels of violence and aggression. We have always described how we take a zero tolerance this takes it to another level where there's another added level of not only deterrence, but also an avenue where we can then actively have additional evidence to take forward prosecutions. As we all know, we've got CCTV in the backs of the ambulances and all the new vehicles, 360 on the outside of the vehicles as well. This is another level. Now, there are some challenges, and using this in a healthcare setting is different to, for example, when the police wear body cameras. But we hope, as we take the learnings from the pilot, we hope to be able to then take further guidance as to how we would then expand this across the wider organisation. And if we need to adapt or reflect the current rollout, we'll do so. But I think it will be worthy through the appropriate board subcommittee, so it will go to risk, safety and governance for the update, and then we'll get a report to the trust board.
I know Will Pope's a very strong supporter of this. He's been asking for it for a while, hasn't he? So I'm sure we'll be pleased to have read him in the papers. Gary, you've got your hand up.
Thank you. Lots of positives in this report, and I was particularly pleased to see that we're starting to open the gap on the harassment and bullying against the rest of the sector. And that's really positive. I had a question on page 4 of the report. The most improved question in this survey is around, in the last 3 months, I've not come to work with not feeling well enough to perform duties, which is good to see, especially given the year we've had with COVID. But also the least improved, it looked to be a very similar question. I couldn't reconcile those two things. I wonder whether perhaps there's some insight that perhaps can be given there.
I haven't really got any insight, Gary, other than really the specifics of question 11F relate to the pressure from colleagues versus generally the pressure that somebody might feel organisationally. So I think that's just the distinction between the two. I haven't got any further intelligence, unfortunately, that might help with that. I mean, nevertheless, even in terms of the least improved, it's still a high number of people who feel that they haven't felt that pressure from their colleagues. But yeah, I mean, in some ways, I can probably understand that, because you know, when you think of the impact of the COVID pandemic and how people might feel that their colleagues might feel somewhat resentful if somebody's not at work, that might be something to do with it, but it's hard to put any other information around it, to be honest.
Because one that really might be that we're actually doing well from the centre and getting the message out there, and we're actually supporting our crews. Perhaps that message hasn't permeated across all the crews, and some of the colleagues perhaps don't carry the same messages we're giving out from the centre. That's what I was reading into it. But the positive is far greater than the negative. I take that as well, so that's good to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary.
Okay, just before we leave this, can we just finish that, round up that discussion we had about the RES and about the need to do something different to try and get different results? And I think that's a task for the Workforce Committee, Kerry and VJ, on behalf of the board, to really, as a committee, think outside the box about what is radically new that we could do that would really make us a shift in what really has been quite static figures all the way through the years of the survey, and we need to see that move. So I think a challenge really for the Workforce Committee to think of something new.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to take that to the committee, and I can share with the committee the current proposals that I'm looking at putting in place as well, and then add to that anything from others' intelligence in terms of what we do differently.
Thank you. Karen?
Yeah, I was just wondering on that, Pauline, if there's any examples nationally where they've got particularly good scores, and what practices is it that they've put in place in order to achieve that? So basically, don't let's reinvent the wheel. Let's look what's happening and where it's happening well.
Yeah, pick up the phone and ask them. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so we're asked to consider the survey results, which we've done, and really they are something to be really proud of. Take assurance from the results shown in the trend analysis, and take assurance from the corporate staff survey action plan in response to the findings. I think we're all happy to do that following discussion. Thank you. We're now moving on to the records of business, and we've got the records of business from the Quality and Governance Committees, and I think there's a couple there.
Nicholas left the meeting now.
So, Stuart, do you need to add anything or draw our attention to anything in the records of business from the committee?
Just a couple of things worth drawing attention to, I think. In the first one, which is the 23rd of March, the first area of assurance, we did take a lot of assurance from presentation by the relatively new trust pharmacist. But we were also informed of the situation whereby we'd unexpectedly received notice from our provider of controlled drugs, the licensing body that has a controlled drug license, which we don't. We talked a little bit about that. It's not causing a problem at present. Very, very small number of specific medications that specialist practitioners might use is the only impact. And we're in the process of trying to get our own controlled drug license, so we are our own masters and mistresses of that. I think it's true to say that the committee was somewhat surprised that they didn't know about the notice being given, but I don't say that to raise a red flag. I'd have put it as an alert if we were very concerned, but I think it's worth the board being aware of that, and we're keeping an eye on that. We're getting an update each month on how that's progressing. Nothing else on the 23rd of March one. And on the 20th of April, worth just giving a bit of airtime to the alert around the violence prevention and reduction standards. There's been some new standards set out by NHSE and I, which came into force on the 1st of April, and that's been coincident with some loss of resource in that particular area of our team due to people moving to leaving the organisation. So we're behind somewhat on that, but again, there are some good steps as to how we're going to rectify that going forwards. And allied to that, as you'll know, the board has a whole bunch of responsibilities for health, safety and well-being. 239 criteria, we're told we have. One of them we have not quite met, the other 238 we have, and it is the one associated with the violence and aggression point. So again, I think the committee's on top of it. Not raising it to the board is a major alert. I did wonder whether to challenge at an earlier paper the green for violence and aggression in the earlier HR paper, but I thought that might be a bit churlish of me. But I think it was worth just linking across between the two, because there is some work to be done. But the chap who was in the meeting from 360 Assurance seemed very switched on about how that could be sorted out. They're the two sort of minor negatives. To end with a positive, and again, I'm sure everyone's read it, but it was excellent to have a case where there were no IR1s more than 7 days outstanding, which is almost unique, if not unique in times, particularly during the times that we're living through. So that was a positive. Happy to take any other questions on that.
Thank you very much, Stuart. We've heard the update from Stuart. Are there any comments or questions? Okay, thank you very much, Stuart, and we'll accept the reports for assurance. The next then is the Finance and Performance Committee records of business. And I think if we got two there as well, I think we have, haven't we? Anything of note, Mike or Karen?
No, I mean, the only thing to update there is we submitted the accounts last year, which showed a minor small surplus, so that's good news. And the alerts were all around performance, which we've touched upon already, I think.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, so if there are no comments or questions, we'll accept both of these reports for assurance. Thank you. And then the Audit Committee record of business, again, is coming for assurance. Gary or Mike, anything you want to add to the report?
Not from my side, no.
No. Any questions or comments for Gary or Mike? No, okay, well, I'll accept that record of business for assurance from the audit committee. And then we've got the workforce committee record of business. Terry and VJ, anything you want to add to the report?
I would just add around the 23rd of February, just to highlight the extract on the flu campaign, just for the board's awareness in terms of the successful flu campaign. That's the only thing in particular I'd highlight. And then the April meeting as set out in the paper. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, again, if there are no comments or questions, we'll accept both of those reports and those records of business for assurance from the workforce committee. Thank you. That moves us on quite nicely then to the governance report. Karen, which you brought to us today. Is there anything you want to add to the report? Anything you want to draw out for our attention?
No, thank you, Chairman. I think it's self-explanatory, but obviously happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Karen on the governance report before we go to the recommendations?
No, thank you.
No, okay, thank you. So we're asked to receive the annual register of declaration of directors' interests before it's published on the website. We've done that, and we're asked to receive the annual register of the use of the trust seal, which we've done. Thank you very much. And then last but not least, the board assurance framework. A lot of work's been done on this since we discussed it in the board development session. So thank you very much, Karen, and straight over to you.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. As you mentioned, this is something that board members have been involved in already through the board development session. We weren't able to have the workshop in person that we normally have to look at the BAF, so we used some time at the board development session and then an exchange of several emails among board members, and then finally a session by the exec team recently at our away day, and the list that you have in front of you is the product from that. So I'm asking the board at this point in time to agree that as the strategic risks, and that we will then, if that is agreed, we will then take that forward, working with the relevant risk owners and the lead committees for each of the risks, and flesh out the detail with the controls and the mitigating actions as we normally do in the standard BAF template. I've noted from the earlier discussions in the meeting the point that you made, Chairman, about increasing demand and how we need to ensure that that's appropriately reflected in the risks in front of us. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Just before I throw it open, I just took particular note while we were talking today about the risks we identified and the risks we discussed. We just need to check that they are reflected. So the big one was about activity exceeding contract value and not having available resource to meet demand. And then the other one was about the financial risk of being part of a challenged system. And I think they were the two key risks we talked about today. Both of them are in the BAF in different words. I think my reflection when I read it over the weekend was that many of the risks under respond, which sit with the Finance and Performance Committee mostly, are really about resources to meet demand, and the risk that for whatever risk it is, whether it's COVID continues, that increases demand, so we haven't got the resources, or whether it's because activity goes up, then we haven't got the resources. And I just wondered, because it felt a bit repetitive, and I just wondered if there was a way of capturing that in one risk. I know it's a challenge, but it seemed to me when I read it, it was about not having enough resource available to respond to the work that we were asked to respond to, for a variety of reasons, whether it be staff deferred because of COVID, or staff sickness, or unmet demand. I don't know. It just felt very repetitive when I read it. I don't know what anybody else felt.
Can I come back on that one, Chair?
Yeah, of course you can.
It may be that we need to reword the risks so that the bit about demand falls into the consequence section on the BAF, rather than in the wording of the risk. Because just as a reminder, the risk is all about the thing that might happen. So I think the resourcing bit isn't the risk, it's the outcome of that thing happening. And I think if we were to try and combine them, there's a danger that we could lose the actual elements of the risk and therefore lose sight of what it is we're trying to manage. So it may be about the wording of the risks rather than actually combining them, but I can definitely take it away and look at both of those options.
So we looked at this as an exec team, and in fact quite an extensive session on it. Karen, would it be worth us just revisiting that aspect? Just see if there is anything we can do around defining the words a little bit more.
Yes, absolutely, Richard. Yeah, more than happy to do that.
Yeah, if we take that way, Paul.
Yeah, would you? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, so that was my bit of feedback. Any other questions or comments from colleagues?
Pauline, I was.
Stuart.
Yeah, I was actually going to come in on sort of Karen's side of that debate, if I might put it as bluntly as that. I think there are quite different drivers for why we might not have enough resource, and I think it's worth keeping them separate, in my view. But the action that's just been taken is fine, addresses that. Thanks.
Yeah, it might just be wording. You're right. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that feedback, Stuart. Okay, so we're asked to approve the revised board assurance framework. Sorry, Karen.
Pauline.
Sorry.
Yes.
I can see your hand now.
All right. Okay. I think we're in a separate capsule. It's just on that point. And again, Karen, you may pick this up, and I have to say, tremendous amount of work that's gone into it, and I can certainly see that. But I've got two queries. Number 1 and number 11. That was a possible amalgamation for me because they are about the risk of the 21-22 financial settlement and could amount to the same. So that was one possible. And then the other areas, for me, when I read number 15, I wasn't exactly sure what the risk was, and I did wonder if I'm reading it right, if it could partner with number 17. So there's two questions. What is 15 asking? There is a risk that our plans for establishing collaborative conflict with any national or regional policy or guidance which is subsequently issued. Just felt a clumsy risk. I don't know what it is.
I think that was something I'd raised about the fact that we were wanting to develop our own provider collaboratives, and that might work against the advice, the national advice and guidance that's going to come down from NHSIE, because there is going to be some guidance on what a provider collaborative will look like, and some givens. And I think it was for me it's a timing issue that we could end up being on the wrong side of that guidance.
Yeah, and this may not emerge as a risk at all. It may be in a few months' time. The landscape around it is clear and it's fine, but it genuinely is a risk at the moment. And maybe Karen's point is maybe we're not explicitly clear enough in the wording of what the risk is. Certainly, as an exec team, we considered this and we feel like it is a genuine risk at this stage.
Okay, then we need to put the word provider in then. The provider collaboratives, because that explains it much clearer than just the word collaborative.
Yeah, fair point.
Then read number 17.
Yeah.
17 is saying something very similar in terms of provider collaboratives.
Yeah, fair point.
Yeah.
So again, they may well be 15 and 17 may be able to come together. Yeah. But I don't know. They were just my observations when I read it.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so any other comments or questions? So we're asking the executive to just look at the wording again in some of the risks, in actually in some of the risks, to make sure that the wording really explains the risk rather than the implications of the risk in there, and to look specifically at whether or not risk 15 and 17 can be combined into one risk.
Yeah.
And then with that piece of work, subject to that piece of work, are we then happy as a board to approve the revised framework? It'll come back again, as it does every month once it's complete, so we will get a chance to see it again in July. Yeah, happy to take that. Yes, nod.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think actually that brings us to the end of the meeting. I'd like to thank everybody for their attendance and their contributions. We'll close the meeting in public and take a break and reconvene. When? How long would you like to have a break for? It's shall we reconvene at 12 o'clock, as is the agenda?
Yeah, that'd help.
So let's stop, stretch our legs and reconvene at 12 o'clock. So thank you very much, everybody. See you later.